had lived in that house for 25 years, long after most people my age had built families or careers of their own. At first, it was necessity, my father's back injury, my mother's declining health, bills that stacked higher than we ever expected. I stayed, and then the years just kept folding in on each other. Somewhere along the way, my life became about preserving theirs. I paid the utilities when work was scarce for them, kept the mortgage current when emergencies drained our accounts, and did the kind of invisible labor no one praises but everyone relies on. I painted the porch each spring, patched the roof after storms, clipped the hedges until the neighbors joked they could set their watches by me. Sacrifice had become habit, and habit eventually felt like obligation. That evening, we were in the dining room, the one I had repainted in soft blue when I was 23. My mother set her fork down, folded her hands, and said evenly, "Corinne, it's time you found your own place." My father nodded, not meeting my eyes, as if the decision had been rehearsed. The words were sharp and flat, slicing through decades of unspoken expectation. I thought I might cry or plead or shout. Instead, I laughed. The sound startled even me, short, dry, too brittle to be mistaken for humor. My mother frowned. "What's funny?" I shook my head, forcing a smile that didn't reach my chest. Nothing. But it wasn't nothing. In that strange burst of laughter, I felt something loosen, like a knot that had held me bound for years. They spoke as though I'd overstayed, as though my presence were an inconvenience, not the scaffolding that kept the house upright. They were already imagining the empty bedroom, the redecorated walls, the space they could finally reclaim. Their dismissal stung, but underneath the sting was a flicker of something I hadn't felt in years possibility. Maybe they thought they were pushing me out. Maybe they were. But for the first time, the idea of leaving didn't feel like loss. It felt like a door opening. I excused myself quietly, carried my plate to the sink, and stood there in the kitchen where I'd prepared thousands of meals. My hands were steady, but my thoughts were racing. They wanted me gone. Fine. Perhaps it was time I learned what gone could mean. I went to bed that night staring at the ceiling, the echo of my mother's words replaying over and over, "Find your own place." They made it sound so simple, as if the past 25 years had been a casual arrangement I could just shrug off. When I was 20, I'd planned to move into an apartment with 2 friends from college. My father's accident changed everything. A fall from scaffolding left him unable to work for nearly a year, and the medical bills came faster than the checks. I stayed, telling myself it was temporary, just until he healed. By the time he was back on his feet, my mother's health began to slide. She hid the severity at first, but I noticed the prescriptions, the fatigue, the hospital visits. Someone needed to manage the finances. Someone had to be steady when both of them were slipping. That someone was me. My friends built their lives, marriages, careers, children, while my life narrowed into a routine of responsibility. I told myself loyalty would be rewarded, that someday they'd look at me and see the daughter who had given up everything to hold the family together. But people forget the scaffolding when the building still stands. In recent years, with their health improved, they began to treat me less like the one who held things together and more like a fixture in the house. My father called me comfortable. My mother, on sharper days, called me dependent. The irony was unbearable. I had been the one to keep the mortgage afloat, the utilities paid, the property tended like a shrine. Yet, in their eyes, I was invisible useful until I wasn't. Replaceable once they decided they wanted something different. That laugh at the dinner table wasn't madness. It was release. It was the sound of chains loosening, of a truth I had refused to admit pressing its way to the surface. If they didn't value what I'd given, then maybe it was time I stopped offering it so freely. And with that thought, the possibility of leaving began to take shape. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee, staring at the stack of envelopes I kept tucked in a drawer. Bills, bank statements, tax records, all the proof of the life I had carried on my shoulders. For years, I had opened them quietly, paid what needed to be paid, and slipped them back without ceremony. My parents never asked, and I never offered. It had become routine. But this time, I pulled everything out and spread it across the table. The mortgage statements bore my name, not theirs. My grandfather had arranged it that way, transferring the deed to me in his will when I was barely 20. He said once, in a hushed voice, that he wanted me to have something of my own because he feared my parents would take too much. At the time, I thought he was being dramatic. Now, I understood. I flipped through my savings account records, investments my grandfather had started for me, modest but steady. Over the years, I had added bits when I could, small deposits that had grown in the background while I worked and saved. On my laptop, I searched the property value. My breath caught when I saw the number. The market had climbed beyond anything I imagined. The house I had been told was not mine to claim was worth over $1 million. I sat back, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound. All these years, I thought I was trapped in obligation, held hostage by loyalty. But the truth was startling. I had been holding the key the whole time. A strange calm settled over me, not fear, not grief, but a steady recognition of power. For the first time in decades, I wasn't the dependent one. I was the owner, the provider, the one with the means to choose. And that choice, once unthinkable, was starting to feel inevitable. I became an actress in my own home. When my mother rattled on about the retirement condos she thought would suit me perfectly, I smiled and nodded as though she had my best interests at heart. When my father bragged to his friends that they would finally get their house back once I moved out, I laughed along like it was a harmless joke. Inside, though, I was already 10 steps ahead of them. The day after I discovered the true value of the property, I reached out to someone I trusted, Mrs. Kellerman, a realtor known for both her skill and her discretion. She had managed a few sales in our neighborhood, always with quiet efficiency, and I knew she wouldn't breathe a word to my parents until I was ready. We met in her office, where the smell of fresh coffee and polished wood made the air feel solid, certain. She reviewed the numbers, scrolling through comparable properties with a look of restrained excitement. "Corinne, if you're serious about selling, you're sitting on a gold mine. This market is moving fast. You'd have buyers lining up immediately." Her words settled into me like an anchor, not weighing me down but steadying me. I asked her to proceed quietly, and she assured me she would. That night, I went through an old box of keepsakes my grandfather had left me. Among the letters and photographs was a postcard of Monaco, its harbor glittering in the Mediterranean sun. On the back, in his careful handwriting, he had written, "Promise me you'll see this place one day. Life is too short to stay in one corner of the world." I traced those words with my fingers, remembering how he used to tell me stories of Europe, of freedom, of beauty that seemed impossible from the confines of our small American town. I never believed I'd go. Now, I could see it clearly. Meanwhile, my parents carried on, oblivious. They gossiped with neighbors about paint colors and furniture sets, about how they would reclaim the space once I finally got out of their way. Their laughter filled the house, certain and smug. I sat among them, quiet, smiling when expected. They thought I was still their dependent daughter, caught under their roof. They had no idea I had already begun tearing the roof away from over their heads. Once I gave Mrs. Kellerman the green light. The process moved faster than I could have imagined. She arranged for a professional stager to come in while my parents were out running errands. I pretended I was reorganizing closets and cleaning carpets so they wouldn't question why strangers came through the door. By the time my parents returned, everything looked almost the same, just a little neater, a little brighter. They didn't notice the subtle touches that would photograph beautifully online. Each evening, my parents would sit in the living room and talk about the big changes they planned for once I finally moved out. My mother wanted to tear down the wallpaper in the dining room, the very one I had chosen and painted years ago. My father mused about knocking down walls for an open floor plan. They spoke like dreamers, blind to the fact that the future they imagined was already slipping away. Within a week, offers began to appear. Mrs. Kellerman sent them over discreetly, each one higher than the last. The market truly was hot, but it wasn't just numbers on paper, there were stories attached. One couple wrote me a letter, explaining how they pictured their children growing up in the backyard, riding bikes on the quiet street, celebrating birthdays in the same dining room my parents had now dismissed as outdated, reading their words. I felt a rush of something I hadn't expected relief. The house deserved to be loved, not resented. I could let it go without bitterness, knowing it was going to people who saw it as a beginning, not a burden. The day I signed the papers, I did it quietly, sitting at Mrs. Kellerman's desk while sunlight streamed through her office window. My hand was steady as I wrote my name, each letter anchoring the choice I had made. When I set the pen down, I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel fear. I felt the weight of 25 years finally lift. The house was no longer my cage. It was my liberation. And all that was left was to tell the people who had taken me for granted that they no longer had a home to claim. For weeks, I let them live in their illusion. My mother clipped magazine pages of kitchens she wanted to remodel. My father paced the living room, talking about how the house would finally feel like ours again once I was gone. They thought I was busy searching for a modest apartment, maybe some rented corner to tuck myself into. In truth, I was waiting for the papers to finalize. The morning they arrived, I placed the envelope neatly on the kitchen table. My parents were sipping coffee, the air heavy with their casual chatter about all the changes they'd make. I sat down, calm and deliberate. "You told me to find my own place," I said softly, sliding the envelope toward them. "I did. The house is sold." At first, they laughed, assuming it was some misguided attempt at sarcasm. But when I opened the documents, laying out the deed, the will from my grandfather, and the signed sale agreement, the laughter died. My mother's face drained of color. "What are you talking about? You can't sell our house." I met her gaze steadily. "It was never yours to sell. Grandfather left it to me, and for 25 years I've kept it afloat, paid the bills, fixed the roof, carried the weight. You just never noticed." My father's fist came down hard on the table, rattling the mugs. "This is our home. You've betrayed us." "No," I said, my voice even. "I've freed myself. You pushed me out, and I walked through the door you opened." For once, silence filled the space where their voices had always overpowered mine. They looked at each other, lost, scrambling for words that wouldn't come. The authority they once wielded over me had evaporated. I stood, pulling 2 suitcases from beside the door. They were already packed documents, essentials, the life I had chosen. I placed a final note on the table, the buyer's move-in date, clear and final. Their eyes followed me as I walked toward the door, but they didn't call me back. For the first time, they couldn't. I stepped outside, closing the door behind me, and with that simple act, I left more than a house. I left the chains of their control, stepping into the future I had already claimed. At the airport, I moved through the terminal with only 2 suitcases, a folder of legal documents, and the wired funds from the sale sitting safely in my account. For years, I had carried the weight of an entire household, but now my life fit into luggage I could roll behind me. It was almost laughable, the difference between what I thought I needed and what I truly did. On the plane, I sat by the window, watching the city I had never really left shrink beneath the wings. My parents had believed they held the power, that I was tethered to their approval, dependent on their permission to exist. They were blind to the truth I had always had independence within reach, only hidden under years of sacrifice. Their ultimatum hadn't broken me, it had revealed me. Hours later, when the clouds finally parted, Monaco came into view. The coastline shimmered like a secret revealed, sunlight bouncing off the water until it looked like glass. The city rose against the mountains, elegant and untouchable, as though it had been waiting all along for me to arrive. I felt no fear stepping off the plane, no ache of leaving behind the familiar. Instead, there was a stillness inside me, a quiet assurance that I had made the right choice. The apartment I had arranged was small compared to the house I had left, but it overlooked the Mediterranean, and the view alone felt like a rebirth. That first night, I stood on the balcony, the air carrying salt and warmth, the sea moving steadily below. For the first time in 25 years, I belonged to no one but myself. And with that realization, I knew the life I had postponed for decades was finally beginning. The mornings in Monaco became my sanctuary. I would wake to the sound of gulls circling the harbor, step onto my terrace with a cup of strong coffee, and watch the sun spread gold across the Mediterranean. The air was softer here, warmer somehow, as though it had been waiting to soothe me after years of gray obligation. I began learning French, stumbling through simple greetings with shopkeepers, repeating phrases to myself until they felt natural on my tongue. The markets were vibrant rows of olives, fresh bread, flowers bursting with color. Neighbors greeted me kindly, curious but welcoming, as if I had always belonged on these narrow streets. For the first time in decades, each day felt like discovery rather than duty. I carved out hours for something I had abandoned long ago: photography. I bought a new camera and wandered the city, capturing light on water, the lines of boats against the horizon, the easy smiles of strangers. Slowly, an idea grew. I could turn this passion into a business, portraits and prints, perhaps even exhibitions. My funds gave me security, but it was this pursuit that gave me purpose. The letters and calls began within weeks. At first, my parents were furious, demanding explanations, accusing me of betrayal. Later, their tone softened, shifting to pleading, reminding me of memories from childhood, begging for another chance. When silence followed, I felt no panic. Their voices had dictated the rhythm of my life for 25 years, but now they were only echoes, fading further each day. I didn't reply. I didn't need to. Their words no longer carried weight. They could not reach me across the sea. Standing on my terrace one evening, camera in hand, I realized I had not just left a house behind. I had left an old version of myself, and in its place, something entirely new was beginning. Months passed, and my life settled into a rhythm that felt wholly mine. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low over the water, my phone lit up with a number I knew by heart. My mother's voice came through, thinner than I remembered. "Corinne, we're struggling. Things aren't easy without you here. Maybe we were too harsh. Maybe we shouldn't have said what we did. Just come back, please." Her words hung in the air, fragile and searching. I listened, letting the silence stretch. Once, I would have rushed to fill it, to reassure, to carry their burdens without question. But now, I felt only a quiet clarity. "I hear you," I said gently. "I hope you find your place. I've found mine." There was a pause, a sharp inhale on the other end, and then nothing more. I ended the call, placing the phone face down on the table. My hands didn't shake. My heart didn't ache. The cycle that had bound me for so long was broken, not with anger, but with release. I stepped out onto my terrace, the evening breeze carrying the scent of salt and jasmine. The sky blazed with streaks of orange and rose, the kind of sunset that made the world feel endless. I lifted a glass of wine, holding it toward the horizon. "After 25 years, I whispered to myself, I didn't just find my own place. I found myself. The sea stretched out before me, vast and unclaimed, and I knew that from this moment on, every step forward belonged only to me,